All right, welcome to 2025. This is Admitted for your advice on college admissions and testing. My name is James Dolan from Tutor Doctor in Indy. Joined with me is Jessica Bush from New Jersey,
Hi,
Byron
everyone.
Zom from Albuquerque, and all the way out west, Chris Liam with Tutor Doctor San Diego County.
Cool.
Going to talk about a number of different topics today with the panel, but really wanted to start off with SAT or ACT. There's differences, there's advantages, there's disadvantages to both. But I guess the question on everybody's mind right now is which test is best for me? Which test should my student take?
Well, there's lots that could be said on this subject, but we need to consider that there's two main parties involved in this, right? There's the student themselves, and then there's the institution that they're hoping to go to, right? So do your homework, right? Know yourself and know where you want to go. So reach out to that school, talk to that program specifically, find out if they have a preference, right? They may or may not have a preference. If they do, you're going to want to know that. Secondly, know yourself, and that is, hey, each of us, we're going to perform differently on different types of tests. If you know yourself, you can know which of those two are going to be able to demonstrate your strengths because those tests, the ACT and the SAT, are designed differently, and certain students will perform better over another on those tests. So one of the things that we do here at Tutor Doctor is that we do actually provide an assessment, a cognitive skills assessment, and that is a great tool in helping a student, make that clear about which of those are different because timing is a factor. Those two tests, timing is a really big factor. You'll know in the SAT that there is not a separate science section, for example, right? But it's built into the reading and writing section. So you want to be aware of that. And then I think geometry, right, is a key one too in the SAT. I think about 35% of the math is geometry. So there's a lot of other things to be aware of, but those would be some fundamentals. You guys can pipe in if you guys want to add something to that.
Yeah, good. Chris, how do the scores play into deciding which test to take? There's different ranges for the different types of scores. As a student, how do I determine which test is right for me based on the scores I'm receiving?
Excellent question, James. We have found through the years, unless there is some really big challenge in terms of the student's learning profile or any learning exceptionalities, we have found roughly about 80%, 80 to 85% over time, the scores are relatively the same. When you look at what's called a concordance, which are published by ACT and College Board and such, what we have found really the biggest difference is as Byron alluded to, the science section, which is almost a misnomer. You don't have to be very scientific at all. You just have to be very adept at weeding out the garbage information from the critical information, which is the reason those passages are in the SAT, why the ACT dedicated a whole section to it, is it's a critical skill for college. So when we take a look at those sort of extraneous details, when a student takes the test and they see that the scores are relatively the same, then we say which test sort of felt right to you. So there's an objective measure and a subjective measure. And then which one would you be more apt to study and not switch horses midstream, as it were? And then secondly, a new question that we ask a lot is, what exam are your friends preparing for? Because we've seen in a number of instances where their friends are looking at one test, so all else equal, then they can do that. So that's really the case. It's very rare that you see lopsided scores. And if that is the case, then we will ask questions like, were you extra tired on that day? Was somebody doing some construction in the room next to you? Or things that are non-exam related. But usually it's straightforward. Oh, I preferred this exam. Scores are roughly the same. There's our choice.
And as Byron mentioned, there's different content areas. They're very similar with a couple of overlaps, but should I drive which test I pick based on how I'm doing in certain classes or which classes I've taken or not taken yet? How does that influence my decision?
Well, the quick answer on that is if a student is willing to do the cognitive test that Byron mentioned, yes. But if the student is willing to take advantage of weekends or break periods to take a full length exam of an SAT and a full length exam of an ACT, then contact your tutor doctor office for a free discussion about how we can dive down into the particulars of those tests. For instance, if a student is strong on geometry but weak on trig, if they're strong on sentence completion but weak on inference questions, we can pinpoint that with the way that we review those reports and make that recommendation to the student.
Excellent, excellent. Jess, can you talk about the different types of groups? If I had to put student into a different group, whether it's a high achieving or they're applying to a highly selective university, or my student athletes, or maybe my procrastinators, how does that play into which test I should be going for?
That's a good question. Typically, what I see is we have to literally go back to which test they're stronger in. That is the bottom line. The only schools that I have, for example, like I had a kid that was going to West Point, and they told him, you have to get your SAT score up 50 more points. But 50 more points was really hard for him to get it, so that was the focus. But he had started out with the SAT to begin with. But I want to go back to a couple of things that Byron and Chris were saying. There's a key thing we haven't talked about the ACT, and that's timing and pacing.
Mm-hmm.
Timing and pacing is the key struggle with students taking the ACT. And if you have kids that have time and a half accommodation or test anxiety or anything like that, it takes a 3-hour test and it makes it over a 4-hour test. And that is exhausting for some of these kids that have ADHD or focusing issues or time and a half. So I actually recently have been suggesting ask your guidance counselor to see if you can get the accommodation to split the test into 2 days. Depending on their IEP, if they have an IEP, sometimes they will approve it. That's a great thing because it makes it English, math next day, reading, science. It makes it so much more doable for some of these kids that have either test anxiety or, serious focusing issues. I think that's really an important aspect to the ACT. To be able to really concentrate and focus on your timing and pacing, especially with this new SAT, which is all shorter, right? And digital and adaptive. The adaptive part is also, some of the kids aren't a fan. Because it puts them into a hard, if they're good at, say, math, and it puts them, and they get a certain percentage of questions correct in module 1, it puts them into the harder module, and some of those questions are really, really hard. So
Gotcha.
I think it all goes back to the schools you're looking at, which test is best for you based on, that's why you need experts like us to help you plan.
And just a quick note on accommodations, as Jessica said, very important. Do work with your counselor at school. If you have an external counselor, that's great. But first start with your school counselor because they know all the different pathways to achieve that. Plus, they're usually on top of the latest because a lot of things are changing, including in California, where we have 32 college campuses, public, as well as a handful privates that went completely test blind and remain such through COVID. AP classes have taken on an outsized role in the portfolio for college admissions decisions. So what's happened through the time is now parents are pursuing accommodations for AP exams, much as they used to when the ACT and SAT were more prevalent. And so what we're finding is that when someone has a sophomore, for instance, taking an AP class, and they're able to get accommodations because of an IEP or 504 or some other diagnosis, then they'll achieve the accommodations for the AP exam. It makes it much easier then to contact College Board and say, hey, can we also, by virtue of having the accommodations for AP, can we also have that for SAT since it's even more stringent exam? And so those decisions, whereas they used to be a couple of months in the past for that decision, now are turning around much more rapidly. The flip side to that is with the ACT, there are some changes coming up. That test will be shorter. So how accommodations will figure into that? Will there be fewer accommodations because the test is being reduced? We don't know. That remains to be seen.
Well, just the online test, not the paper.
Right.
Just the online ACT.
And we're hearing more about those changes or those enhancements every week, right? There's new things getting released. We all know, or hopefully our audience knows, that the SAT was enhanced in March of 2024 to provide some changes. It was shorter. It was adaptive technology. So there's a lot of things we're still learning now, almost a year later from that test. I'm sure there'll be more to come about the ACT.
Could I just interject a point?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we talked about, either one, but there are situations where it's going to be in the student's interest to do both tests, the ACT and the SAT, especially if you're, a high achiever or going into a program that's highly selective, right? To be able to have both of those scores shows a lot of things, right? Assuming your score is going to be a strong score, but it's demonstrating initiative, right? And there is no point scale for that, but when they see that, they're looking for those highly motivated students. So that would be one of the reasons why you might want to consider doing both.
Yeah. Well, and here's another, since you brought up high achievers, another reason some of our students start doing that a lot earlier in their school year, sophomore, and even we have a couple of freshmen that are already tackling this test, is because those scores could influence scholarships and merit-based awards that they're going after.
And recruitment.
And recruitment. We've talked a lot about athletes before. Some of those coaches are looking for their SAT, ACT scores a lot earlier so they can understand if they've got a roster spot for them. So there are a lot of reasons to jump on that earlier. Absolutely.
So which speaks to the whole thing of putting a plan together, right? Start this journey earlier, at least start looking into it earlier than later. Because, if we can put a plan together that's actually going to directly address your needs and goals, you're going to be a lot better spot than if you waited till, like what a lot of people, way too many people do, wait till your senior year, and now you're under all kinds of intense pressure to perform, and it's just way too much to ask of a student.
Agreed.
And a very fast story that will help amplify that. Here in California, as I mentioned, we've been test blind. There are, of course, tons of colleges outside of California that remain, test optional or test required. And this last fall and the prior fall, in both of those time periods, we've had 2 or 3 different parents call us literally in tears because they've had a D1 athlete for lacrosse, football, whatever it is, and they've been told by a school counselor or principal or someone else that the SAT and the ACT didn't even matter anymore. And so they were misinformed. And so they would contact us and literally in tears and say, oh my gosh, my son is ready to go and all's to go. And they said, we need an SAT or ACT score at this point. And ask us literally, can we do overnight 36 hours of prep because he's registered for Saturday. Here it is Thursday morning. And so we said, well, that's not really how this works. You can find plenty of people who would take your money. So instead, we gave them some strategies about how to go back to the recruiter and say, hey, here's what the real scenario is. And can you extend this out in time? Can we take the December test, for instance, and get those results in? And in every single instance that was successful. And then we were able to prepare the student, and then they exceeded their score goals and got into their prestigious D1 athletic scholarship. So there is some of that is properly being informed, as Byron said, and really get some help. We're happy to talk with you at no cost, certainly, but there's plenty of other professionals in your community who can give you proper guidance.
Yeah. So if I had to summarize this, SAT or ACT, which is the best test for me? Sounds like the answer is it depends.
It depends on the student.
Yeah. All right. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about. We mentioned the SAT and how it had changed in 2024. If I'm a parent of or someone that has taken the SAT myself, or maybe I had an older student that already took it, and we think we know how to prepare it. If we had to give maybe the top 3 changes to the SAT from last year that I need to be aware of this year, what would we put on the top of that list?
Well, it sounds to me that the ACT, the changes that they're implementing are going to be similar in format anyway to what SAT has done. Obviously, it's going from a paper to a digital version. Secondly, being adaptive in nature, right?
Oh.
For the SAT, yeah.
Not for the AC. What are we talking about? SAT
For,
or
let's
ACT?
Yeah, I was talking about ACT, so go ahead, Jess.
No, it's not going to be adaptive, thank goodness.
the ACT isn't, but the SAT is adaptive.
Yes.
Talk about what that means for the SAT being adaptive, though.
Adaptive means the better you do, the harder it gets. So there's modules, right? So what I've seen in the scores that we're doing is if the first, say, 20 questions, you get a certain percentage correct, which I believe is over 50%, it moves you into H module, which is hard. So, and that's adaptive. If you don't get that many correct and more of your questions are incorrect percentage-wise, it keeps you into more easier module. And my question, and I'm still baffled by how they score that properly. Whether the student does really well in an easy module, but moves into the harder module and gets more questions wrong in the harder module. I
Yeah,
still that to me is a topic we can talk about once we learn how they score that because
that scoring algorithm, I had a chance to take a deep dive on that. It's pretty intense. In a nutshell, if I get a question right that more people get wrong, that is considered a harder question, but I got it right, so I get more points.
So it has to do with how many people in that particular test are getting it right or wrong.
Likewise, if on the counter side, if a question is considered easy because more people got it right, but I got it wrong, it works to my detriment even further. It's all an algorithm. It is. I mean, it's kind of like Vegas sports betting. Don't even try to understand it. It is going to change as soon as you figure it out. But
well, and
do
it's
we
challenging.
know yet?
It's challenging to talk to parents about that because
Sure.
they ask, well, how is that scored? And that's an
Yeah.
Well,
interesting
and the
conversation.
other piece of it is as well is each question has a slightly different number of points. It's not 1 point per question. To James's point, there are some that fractionally more and fractionally less for each question. That comes into the overall gradation of it. College Board uses the term modularly adaptive. So it's not like every single question you're taking along the test is completely randomized and adaptive. Everybody takes the same first module, whether it's the math or the English. Everybody has that same first module, different ordering of questions within it, but the same box of 27 questions or 22 questions, English and math, respectively. Then, as Jessica mentioned, there's a branching. Once you exceed a certain number, whether in that range, it will then move you up to the hard or down to the lower area. And there's been a lot of articles out there that have tried to game it and simulate it and everything. And what they find is if you do not well enough in the first module,
Right.
But then you go to the lower module and get perfect score, they believe the maximum you can get on a section like that is around 650 points. So, but here's the reality of it. Most of the experts in the space say, don't worry about that. There's too many people trying to understand exactly what's under the hood when what they're really being asked to do is drive the car. And so that's really the three key points of pacing and timing, as Jessica mentioned, which a lot of students today aren't really on top of. Secondly, is the subject matter. Yes, that's there. That can be strengthened. But also the test taking strategies, which aren't taught as often in schools today either. So it's really that three-legged stool, if you will. That's where a good test prep coach can help a student. And it's typically not the stuff that somebody will learn on YouTube. You do need to have a good tutor or academic coach to help you guide through it.
Yeah, that plan has to be individualized to what your goals are, what your targets are, but has to be able to be flexible enough as you're working through the plan. There might be areas you speed up or slow down based on the student's ability to do tutoring. So
Can I just
that's
add
great.
one
And
thing?
there's so many changes.
I
Yeah,
need
go
to
ahead.
add one thing to what Chris was saying. I think that what I'm seeing from speaking to a lot of parents, they're saying, "Oh yeah, my kid's been doing English SAT prep." I said, "Okay, so is that English tutor? How is that English tutor tutoring them with the new SAT? Do you're aware of the changes on the digital SAT?" "Oh yeah, with a study guide." And I said, "Well, you know, we use a portal." And the reason that we use a portal is because the kids have to learn how to take a digital test. That's really important. You can't go and tutor this SAT the old-fashioned way anymore. You can't. You know, you're not giving them all of the skills that they're going to need to sit in front of a digital adaptive test when you're
Yeah.
when you're tutoring them with a good old-fashioned paper study guide.
Yeah.
So, and I think once we present that as, you know, we are the experts. We know the latest and greatest of what's going on with the test. And you know, a lot of these test prep tutors that are out there are still using paper prep materials. And this is one of the benefits of working with somebody like us, is that we have a portal, we have, you know, which is pretty much of a mock to the actual test. And that is a
Well, and some
really
of the what are some of those simulated things? I know the on-screen Desmos calculator. That's
yeah.
important to be
Yeah,
able to maneuver.
you can mark and put skip something but mark it, like highlight. Highlight, you can mark something to go back to it. You know, there's a timer in there. They have to learn how to take, and if they're not technologically savvy kids, some of them are, but some of them aren't. You know,
Yeah.
some of them don't like taking it. They need practice on how to, they've never used a Desmos calculator.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, that's
another
important.
thing I've heard from a few of our clients is just the fact that the timer is on the screen with the student now could really play into that pacing that
Yep.
someone's watching that. You know, before when you're looking at a clock in the room or someone's calling out time points,
It could
it's
be a
different than
distraction. Yeah,
yeah, but it's right there in front of you the whole time. So I think you're exactly right, Jess. You have to simulate the test in a test environment that is as
100%.
closely representative of the day of the test. Because on that day of the test, you're going to wake up with butterflies. You're going to wake up nervous if you slept the night before, if you know had the right drink in the morning to get you going. You don't need to also show up and say, "How do I use this calculator?" or
Exactly.
what does highlight mean, or how do I flag a question? You need to be beyond that, and that's something that a lot of our programs, our platforms, address very early on in the process. Great point.
And
Exactly.
James, we've
We're shift.
addressed two of the three questions in pretty good detail, or answers of how it is different moving into the new year. And just recapping, number one, it's moved the tests. Both of them are SAT has moved, ACT is moving from paper to I almost said paper to plastic, from paper to online. Secondly, the fact that the tests are reduced in timing in the overall runtime of it. But the third, and we didn't mention this, and this is important, but we alluded to it, is access to a broad enough number of practice tests where a student can use that to reinforce and actually get the time trials done. Much like somebody who's going to be a track athlete, you don't go out and run a marathon while sitting and drinking root beer and eating pizza all season, right? You need to actually go out and do some running. So that's one of the things that we have. There are many premium providers out there, but that have access to a large number of practice tests that are data proven to assimilate what is going to be there with the official test, not just randomized tests that some college kids put together, but really are going to be a true representation of what the student will face on official exam day. So that's sort of the third answer to it when somebody is looking at it, particularly in light of the prior two. We're going digital and the tests are changed in terms of strategy. So now how do we work on that and practice that? And that's something that your local tutor doctor office, again, would be happy to discuss with you and show you some of the details.
Good points.
The
Good
granular
points.
data
All right.
that we can get on those practice tests, you know, and use it for comparative analysis is really huge in putting together an efficient plan to help that student reach their goals.
Yeah.
Which is a team approach, and that's what we take. So the student, it's not a DIY. And student, good luck to you on test day. We do everything we can in the background to help that student get to where they need to go.
Excellent. All right, let's talk about some quick tips for success for the SAT and ACT this spring. If we had to rapid fire, kind of throw some quick tips for students, for families, for tutors getting involved, what are some quick tips we can put out there for test prep for SAT or ACT this spring?
The
Well,
lightning round begins.
With plan,
I was just
right?
going to
Put a
say
plan together. I mean, that's where it all starts, you know, and start early. Don't start asking questions early about this. Consult with your college counselor at school, call Tutor Doctor, talk to somebody who's in the know and start putting a plan together. Because if you want to, drive through McDonald's and go through the drive-through like everybody else does when it comes to taking these tests, you can do that if you want the minimum. But if you want to put a real plan together that's customized to you and your goals, talk to someone like Tutor Doctor who will help you put a customized plan together and get you on the right track so that you're asking the right questions so that you get the right answers, because there is no one way to do this.
I have
Good
one
start.
more. I
Yeah,
have
go
one
ahead.
more tip that ties in with what Byron said, because we've run into this. You have to not just plan your test, plan what's going on around your test within your
Mhm.
school year. Because I had a kid last year who had his junior prom the night before his ACT test. And I was like, now I say, when is your junior prom? We need to put that in the calendar, because that is not a test you want to take. And you don't want them to miss their prom, you know? So planning their school year, when are your final exams? When is your last day of school? When is your prom? When, all of these things that affect the test that you're going to, be taking. You have to make a full plan.
Class load,
Class load.
Yep.
When are your
summertime,
AP tests? Are you having
yeah.
any AP tests?
Hmm.
Some people have AP tests and final exams. I've had that. Don't assume just because you're taking the AP test that you're not going to have a final. Talk to your teachers.
Point.
Yeah, and so it's very important. Plan it, schedule it, work it, review it. And review it means with whether it's a study group, whether you're taking classes, or again, whether you have a private tutor. But plan it, schedule it, work it, review it. That gives you that feedback loop so that you can continue to adjust your plan as you go.
Awesome. And then call Tutor Doctor, right?
It is.
Excellent, everybody. Great information today. We'll have another topic for you the next month, but appreciate everybody's time and good luck on that SAT or ACT or whatever test you decide to take. And this has been Admitted for your advice on college admissions and testing.
And how do they find us, James?
TutorDoctor.com, TUTORDOCTOR.
Or they can reach us at the 800 number 488-8677. And it's all of us from Tutor Doctor, How Learning Hits Home.
Thank you.
Have a good day.